it's fair to say the Scottish Socialist Party, as I'm sure you all know, we're in favour of independence for Scotland. We're passionate about independence for Scotland, and we passionately believe in an independent socialist Scotland. It's also fair to point out that the Scottish Socialist Party is different from the Scottish National Party. We are in favour of socialism for Scotland. We're in favour of a modern democratic republic. We're in favour of Scotland being known throughout the world as a peace-loving country, as opposed to one with nuclear weapons and threatening the rest of the world with warmongering of one kind or another, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere else. Thank you very much. And it's our opportunity and our task tonight to put in front of you, I'm sure you'll all have seen the leaflets, that the major thrust of the meeting is we want to put in front of you the case why we believe that working people like us will be better off under independence. We'll be better off economically, we'll be better off politically, we'll be better off culturally, we'll be better off in charge of our own decisions, democratically decided, and making our future our responsibility. And that's really the function of the three speakers in front of us tonight. So I want first of all to introduce you to the first of our three speakers. And hiya, come in. As you well know, there's a debate going on across Scotland because the SNP are considering at their conference in a couple of weeks' time about changing their existing policy towards NATO. They're thinking about an independent Scotland. Scotland should remain in part of NATO. Now the Scottish Socialist Party is against that. We don't support NATO. We don't think Scotland should be part of it. And as you well know, there are many other people who feel likewise. There's a No to NATO campaign established by Trident Ploughshares that the Scottish Socialist Party and others are involved in. And I want therefore to introduce our first speaker for this evening. And earlier on I mentioned that I'm the joint national spokesperson of the Scottish Socialist Party, so inevitably you'll be wondering who the other joint national spokesperson is. And I'm happy to say she's with us tonight. So I wonder if you'll give a nice big warm welcome. She's come all the way from Paisley to Sandra Webster. Thank you very much, Sandra.
Thanks very much. I'm actually East Coasted by this, so it's always really good to escape again over to the East Coast from the West Coast. So thanks very much, Colin, for that introduction tonight. I told a friend last week that I was speaking tonight and how nervous I was, but don't be silly, just speak from your heart. That's what I'm going to do tonight, because our party believes in speaking from the heart of our policies, and that's where they come from. I think it's really good to have a woman on the platform tonight as well, because I think the Yes campaign are saying that men, women are undecided. We really need to hear. Sure. Okay, sorry. It's very important to have a woman speaker tonight. I think the Yes campaign are indicating that up to 50% of women haven't made their mind up yet. So it's really important that women's voices and other groups are heard as well. So that's why I'm grateful to be here tonight. I'm actually quite excited to be involved in all the talks on independence, because I know what a beautiful thing an independent Scotland's going to be. And it's almost in our grasp now. Maybe in my lifetime and my children's lifetime will have a right to have an independent Scotland, and I know how beautiful and a wonderful place that's going to be. So for the next couple of years, up to the independent referendum, I'll be speaking about this as well. As Colin said, we're both involved in the No to NATO campaign, organised by Trident Ploughshares. And it's fair to say that I've learned so much in their approach, a non-violent approach to No to NATO, and a lot about the history of NATO and Trident. As Colin said, the SNP in October in their conference in Perth will be passing the motion that perhaps Scotland should be part of NATO. I know that some people in the press are saying that this is a U-turn, but actually it's not. In 1992, the SNP actually pledged, and they were going to demand that nuclear weapons be removed from Scotland. In 2001, they changed their idea. It's going to be negotiated, that Trident would have to be a negotiation. It took a bit longer than having an independent Scotland one day and nuclear weapons leaving our soil the next. So it's moved from that. So it's not a complete U-turn. But as Colin says, our policy has always been that we want an independent free Scotland and a Trident free Scotland. As you know, we have Trident missiles as part of our NATO treaty alliance. Now, NATO was formed in 1949. You know what the landscape was like then, very different from our political landscape today. The world had just recovered from World War II. Lots of new blocs and political empires were being forged. Lord Ismay, who was the first secretary for Britain in 1949, he said that the aim of NATO was, I'm going to quote this, to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. Well, look what's happened today. It's fair to say that Russia doesn't exist anymore with the fall of the wall and things. The Germans are part of the European Union, very strong members of that. And do we really want to be with the Americans anymore? It's fair to say that the role of NATO has changed from being a bloc with those aims. They are now very, very political. The Cold War has ended, and that's one of the aims. But after September 11th and what happened, it became quite political. The Section 50 of the treaty said, that attack on one member state was attack of all. And so due to this, we've found ourselves embroiled in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think it's been 10 years that people have been fighting in Afghanistan now, and that's double the length of World War II. And you can imagine, our young men are still being sent away to die in foreign lands. It's quite a shame. And I bet everybody here knows the story, or knows someone who's been back, and fought in those wars. Also, NATO, as I said, carries a nuclear deterrent. Right near this desk, in the Glenford Brazen Paisley, and it's a beautiful place. You can look at the top and see the whole of the Clyde Valley down below you. Right over to Paz Lane. Right next door to the sleepy wee town of Helensburgh. But we all know what Helensburgh is like. It's a nice place to go for an afternoon tea, and it's full of tartan, and tourists come there very sleepy. We just walk just 5 miles down the road. It's one of the most massive bases in the world. It's actually a factory of warfare. They've got a crane there that's the size of Wembley Stadium for lifting the nuclear submarines. You go down there and you're surrounded by zip wire and policemen carrying, weapons. Very, very sinister place. You know that Paz Lane is home of the Trident missiles, the D5s. Now, one single one of those warheads has the same effect as 100 Hiroshimas. So imagine if even if there's a nuclear accident. And my friends at Paz Lane told me last Sunday they had every so often to do this. It's called Sunday Sermon, and they pretend there was a nuclear accident happening, and what's going to happen. And they actually took some measures to get rid of it. But I remember at Chernobyl, when was that? 1996. Chernobyl was
86.
86. Sorry. I remember I was a young student down in Ardrossan at the time, and the fallout from Chernobyl came over Scotland, and the alarms went over. So any nuclear accident could just mean the end of us, the whole of Scotland was wiped off the map, basically. I know that the Better Together, or as some of us like to call them, the Bitter Together, they kind of campaign about jobs. If we're out in NATO, there'll be no jobs, what are we going to do? Well, what happened to things like our mining, our engineering? They've all been destroyed as well. And I have faith, like I bet you too, in the future of Scotland, and our intelligence is a race to rebuild economies again. And why should our economies be built on mass destruction and war? Do we want to be part of that? And our children? I know I don't. That's why I'm optimistic about Scotland's people. And all like the SNP, I don't know if you heard about, you probably all have 50 Shades of Grey. It's caused a bit of controversy down south, Well, I think the SNP's version of independence is 50 Shades of Independence. They're trying to make us think that nothing's going to change. But why shouldn't things change? It could really be a beautiful place. And it's up to us to share that, and get people excited about it. I'm just going to end in a story. My neighbour asked me to share this with you. My neighbour upstairs, I've known for a long time. They're wonderful people. Their son, Fraser, is a young man of 17. Fraser's dad hasn't worked for the last 10 years. He was a joiner, just the downtown in economy. Fraser left school in Christmas time. He's applied for 40 apprenticeships. He couldn't get a place at college to do anything he's doing. Do you know what that young man's thinking of doing? Joining the army. I think it's a total disgrace that, the only way that our young people can get training, is by being part of a military exercise. It's absolutely shocking. And as a socialist, we want a Scotland where our young people don't have to face that choice, you know what I mean? And I know that Anna asked me to share that story, you know what I mean? And we want a Scotland to call, don't we, where it's not going to be like that. Everybody has their choice. So I'm going to end there. I'd just like to say, you know, NATO costs us a lot of money. Financially, it's very expensive. But as Colin also said, you know, and socially and culturally, it's a terrible thing to be part of. I mean, an independent Scotland really should be a beacon of light, a different place where people can say things, people are going to do things different, and that's good. They're not going to be the same. So by getting rid of NATO, I think this would be a positive step to show that we mean business and that we're a peace-loving people, not warmongers. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Sandra on your behalf for those meetings. Can everybody hear us at the back? I have a megaphone and a sound system in the car. I'm happy to go and get it. If you feel you need us at the back, just give us a shout, just wave. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. That's grand, okay. It's in the car, I'll bring it if you need it. I was just going to say, following what Sandra was commenting on there, people should be aware that when we hear the day the SNP is having their conference in Perth, I think it's the 17th, 18th, 19th of October, sometime around there. I don't think the timetable for the debates is yet available, but when it is clear when they will be debating the issue of whether or not Scotland will be part of NATO post-independence, then Trident Ploughshares, the SSP, etc. will be looking to those people who are minded to keep the existing policy that Scotland should stay out of NATO, and we'll let you know, and as many people I hope as you can get along, if it's the Thursday, the Friday, the Saturday, to Perth would come along and protest outside the conference that is the will of progressive Scotland, that policy remains rather than changing it, which will, after all, change it to a policy that is already the Tories, the Liberals and New Labour's policy. So once we hear about that, Sandra, myself, or the websites, I'm sure we'll let you know. So that's terrific news. We'll send in for even more chairs, so if they come, you'll get one. If you're not, you can sit on the tables. Our next speaker, moving on to introduce him, is Campbell Martin, who's a former SNP MSP. I had the pleasure of spending 4 years sitting beside him in the back benches of the Scottish Parliament. Campbell was 27 years a member of the Scottish National Party, and last year decided that he'd had enough and that he joined the Scottish Socialist Party because he wanted to pursue an independent socialist Scotland. So Campbell's responsibility tonight is to put the case in front of you, to outline why working people will be better off under independence and why that's a vision that should inspire us all. So hope you give a nice big round of applause to Campbell Martin.
Thanks very much, Colin. I'm from Ardrossan in Ayrshire. I don't know if you know Ardrossan. For those of you who don't know Ardrossan, it's a subtropical paradise. It's a subtropical paradise where the palm trees sway gently in the breeze and where the white sandy beaches are washed with the crystal clear waters of the Firth of Clyde. That's Ardrossan. And for those of you who do know Ardrossan, it's between us, okay? Ardrossan, unfortunately, is now a town that doesn't have its problems to seek. My dad was a docker in Ardrossan. He worked all his days loading and unloading ships in all weather. And that dock at one time employed over 100 people. It's now a yachting marina. And it really, really angers me to see something that was the heart of my hometown no longer existing. There's no employment there. Ardrossan now is a ghost town. North Ayrshire again now announced today has the highest unemployment in Scotland. But Ardrossan is just a metaphor for virtually every town, every city, every district in the city across the length and breadth of Scotland, because we've got soaring unemployment. And the reason we have soaring unemployment is because we don't control our own affairs. Our economy, the policy and economy is set hundreds of miles south of here. They don't allow us to have the power to govern our own country. As Colin said, I was a member of the SNP for 27 years. I've campaigned for independence all of my adult life, which is about 35 years. I hope it's not another 35 years before we have the guts to get off our knees and retake the powers. The powers that only come with independence, the powers we need to radically transform Scottish society, because we can't do it under devolution. We need the powers, the full powers that only come with independence. So I sincerely hope that very, very soon we can persuade enough of the population of Scotland to support independence and retake the powers we need to govern our own country. But even when I was a member of the SNP, unlike some of my colleagues at that time, I never ever saw independence as the goal. That once it was achieved, that's it, happy days are here again, we all go home. For me, independence was the starting point. That's where the work really begins. When we retake the powers of independence and start rebuilding our country. Independence isn't the end product. Independence is the catalyst. It's the catalyst that allows us to take the powers we need to deal with the bread and butter issues that affect every one of us every day of our lives. We can't begin to do that until we retake the powers of independence. And I was always of the opinion, even when I was in the SNP, that we needed socialist policies to radically transform Scotland. There were some left-wingers in the SNP, there still are some left-wingers in the SNP, but they're very quiet just now. They're kind of keeping things, don't scare the horses kind of thing, because they're getting close to the holy grail of the independence referendum. But I'll tell you something, the SNP, quite rightly, has been getting a lot of criticism for the way it has been changing its policies, dropping principles. You know, we'll still have the monetary policy set by the Bank of England. You know, we'll still have, or we're going to be members of NATO apparently, because the leadership of the SNP thinks that's a good idea. But one of the things the SNP is criticised for, and they're criticised unfairly, is retaining the Queen as head of state in an independent Scotland. Because the SNP has never been a Republican party. The SNP has always been a monarchist party. It's always been its policy to have the Queen as head of state. And when I was a member of the SNP as a Republican, I knew I was tempering my beliefs. I knew I was doing that. But at that time, there was only one alternative. I joined the SNP in 1977. And if you wanted an independent Scotland, that was the only vehicle. You had to join the SNP. I've said to Colin before that if the SSP had existed in 1977, without a doubt I would have joined the SSP back then. Because I know there is virtually no point in securing independence for Scotland if we're just going to remake that new country along the lines of the failed British capitalist model. There's no point, because that would just continue the inequality. It would just continue a generation of young people with no hope, no opportunity, no future. The capitalist system is corrupt. You can't tinker with the capitalist system. You can't make it fairer, because it's not a fair system. The capitalist system operates to make a very small elite at the top extremely wealthy through exploiting the majority. That's what capitalism is. It's not fair. It can't be tinkered with. It can't be amended. You can't make it fair. And that's why we need to replace it. We're only going to replace it by taking back the full powers of independence, and then we can implement socialist policies to radically transform society, to create jobs, to redistribute the wealth. Mr. McCall of Clyde Blowers, a man who lives in Monaco, I really don't think the SNP should be trumpeting the fact they've got a billionaire supporting them who's not willing to come here and pay his fair share in taxation. It might be nice to have converts to your cause, but an independent Scotland is going to be fair, it's going to be better, it's going to be different. We need to do away with the fact that people can become billionaires when there's thousands upon thousands of people who don't have enough money to pay their electricity bill or buy their food. Across this city tonight, 1 in 4 children will be going to bed hungry. Yet Mr. McAllion has got billions of pounds salted away in bank accounts and doesn't pay his fair share in taxation. I wouldn't want that man as a member of my party. He'll never be a member of the Scottish Socialist Party. I don't think there's any danger of that. But the Scottish National Party has become a party that's quite comfortable, like Labour was, like Peter Mandelson said, that Labour had become intensely relaxed about people becoming extremely wealthy. Unfortunately, the SNP has taken that ground, the new Labour approach. I can remember a very good friend, John Swinney, the man who expelled me from the Scottish National Party for saying he was shite, basically. I'm paraphrasing a wee bit, but it's accurate. To describe the man as a leader is ridiculous. I mean, you don't have to look at the statistics to prove that. He led the SNP to losing hundreds of members, losing seats, losing all the rest of it. But I remember John Swinney saying he admired what Tony Blair had done with the Labour Party. I would say to the Labour Party. Swinney admired that, and the SNP's move to the right of the political spectrum began under him. Unfortunately, it hasn't changed much under the second. And that's not going to make any difference to the people of Scotland with an SNP in administration and an independent Scotland. We need the policies that's going to change society. And one of the problems I have with the SNP just now is this idea. I mean, we all know why they're doing it. We're approaching a referendum, they want to win the referendum, we want to win the referendum. But we believe you'll win the referendum by being honest with the public, by telling them the benefits and the merits of independence, and through that by persuading them to support independence. What the SNP are doing just now is basically saying, let's not frighten the horses, let's just get through this. And all things to all people. They're saying, look, don't worry about it, nothing will change, it'll be fine, it's okay, nothing will change. Well, I want things to change. If nothing's going to change, what's the point? I want things to change for the better. And that's why I believe that we need not just independence, but a socialist government post-independence. We have been indoctrinated for 300 years, indoctrinated as a nation and indoctrinated as a class. We've been indoctrinated as a nation. 300 years ago they told us you're too weak, you're too poor, you're too stupid to govern your own country. They're still telling us it. Listen to the Bitter Together campaign, the No to Independence campaign. Essentially their message is still, you're too weak, too stupid and too poor to govern your own country. As a class, we've been told, this is as good as it gets. Don't get ideas above your station. This is your lot in life. Don't rock the boat. Well, I think we should rock the boat. I think we should start demanding a better life for the people of Scotland. And we're only going to take that better life, we're only going to be able to create that better life by taking back the powers to govern our own country. I'll tell you one thing about a policy that the SNP has changed. The SNP a few years ago, and some of us who were members at the time tried to stop it, but they changed their policy on independence. Previously the SNP policy was that a mandate for independence was a majority of seats at an election or a majority of votes at an election. They changed that. The policy became that a majority of seats or a majority of votes was a mandate simply for a referendum on independence. If the SNP hadn't changed that policy, the result of the Scottish Parliament election in 2011 was a mandate for independence. This all things to all people doesn't work. We need to be honest with the people of Scotland. We need to say, you will be better off under independence. And I'll give you an example of why you'll be better off. Because the Westminster government's own figures show that the two biggest contributors to the Westminster Exchequer every year are revenue from North Sea oil and from the Scotch whisky industry. Just two industries. The two biggest contributors to the Westminster Exchequer every year. The money raised in Scotland should stay in Scotland. This isn't narrow nationalism. This is about standing up for the people of Scotland. This is about building a better life, a better country for all the people of Scotland. It's no narrow nationalistic to want a better life for your family, your kids, your relations, your fellow workers, the people who live in your street. That's normal. But once we get independence and establish a socialist government, we can be a socialist beacon to the world. We can show as an independent socialist Scotland just how well socialism works for the people by putting the interests of the people before the profits of multinational corporations. We can show to the world, to our friends in England, in Wales, in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, everywhere, we can show them just how well socialism works, but we need the powers of independence. And I'll move on to the referendum, this campaign that we're in. If you look at the No to Independence campaign, there's nothing positive. What are they saying that's positive about why we should stay in the British Union? There's nothing positive. It's all scare stories. It's all to frighten people away from independence. Their big hitter, Alistair Darling, the man that said he would cut deeper and faster than anything Thatcher ever did if he'd been re-elected. He's the poster boy. He's the one that's going to persuade us, supposedly, to stay within this British Union. And he went as far as saying, if you vote for independence, you'll be bad parents. Every one of you is a parent in here. You'll be a bad parent because you'll send your children to a deeply uncertain future. Are you scared yet? Yes. This is the level of their argument to retain Scotland within the British Union, to scare you. You'll be bad parents. So apparently, we should avoid this uncertain future. We should stick with the certainty of the British Union. You know the certainty we've got in the British Union. That's the certainty of soaring unemployment. The certainty of the British Union is areas of multiple deprivation in every city and every town in this country. That's Scotland within the British Union. The certainty of the British Union is devastating cuts to services that we desperately need, and all to pay for debts run up by multi-millionaire bankers in the City of London. That's the certainty of the British Union. There's the certainty of children growing up in poverty across Scotland. That's Scotland within the British Union. That's the certainty we have within the British Union. There's the certainty within the British Union that over the next few months, many of the elderly people we know will die. They'll die because they're poor. They can't afford to pay their electricity and gas bills. That's another certainty within the British Union. So bear that in mind when Alistair Darling's telling you about this uncertain future of independence. You know, like every other normal nation in the face of the world that's independent, the uncertain future that he's warning you about. And one other thing to remember about the certainty of the British Union is the certainty that within the British Union, young Scots will still be sent to kill or be killed in illegal, immoral, imperialist wars, usually in the interests of American oil corporations. That's the certainty of the British Union, of Scotland remaining within the British Union. And I'll tell you something, I'm absolutely, totally appalled at the so-called Scottish Labour Party. The Scottish Labour Party standing shoulder to shoulder with Tories, shoulder to shoulder with the party of David Cameron and Margaret Thatcher, telling us that we shouldn't have the right to end Tory rule in Scotland, despite the fact we rejected them at the ballot box. They're governing our country. And the Scottish Labour Party is standing shoulder to shoulder with them, telling us we don't have the right to govern our own country. We don't have the right to say never again do we want a Tory government in Scotland. That's the Scottish Labour Party. That's what they're doing right now. And let's be very, very clear what the Labour Party is actually saying. They're saying they would rather see David Cameron and his Thatcherite Tory party govern Scotland from London than have a Labour First Minister and a Labour government in an independent Scotland. They'd rather have the Tories than their own party governing Scotland if it meant independence. It's madness. They've got no positive outlook. They've got nothing positive to say about Scotland, or indeed the Scottish people. And Alistair Darling also said, if you vote for independence, there's no way back. Another scary thing, you're away out there, there's no way back. I had a look, there's 48 countries have taken their independence from Britain. 48, from the United States in 1776 to Brunei in 1984. 48 countries. And of those 48 countries, not one has tried to find their way back. All 48 countries are perfectly happy being a normal, independent country, because that's what independence is. It's normal. You ever heard of a country celebrating Devolution Day? Countries celebrate Independence Day because independence is normal. It's the normal status. Yet we are told if we seek for Scotland the powers of a normal independent nation, it would be a disaster. In other words, a disaster. They tell us that we're separatists, we want to separate from everybody, but it's Britain, it's Scotland within the British Union that separates us from the powers we need to govern our country, separates us from the big wide world out there in terms of the United Nations, in terms of the international trade agreements with countries that would benefit the people of Scotland. It's being an invisible region that separates Scotland from the world. Retaking our independence is normality. Retaking independence is the normal state of affairs for a country. So I'll finish by just pointing out some other things about Scotland that we should maybe consider when we go to the ballot box in 2014 to cast our vote. An independent Scotland, these are independent figures by the way, an independent analysis. An independent Scotland with all the resources and the wealth and the skills and the ability of the people of Scotland would be the 6th richest nation on the face of the earth. The 6th richest nation. Population of 5 million people, the 6th richest nation on the face of the earth. But they knew that in the 70s, when Professor Macron delivered his committee report. He said then Scotland would have a surplus so large it would be embarrassing. So large it would be embarrassing. They knew that in the 70s and they buried that report. It only came to light a couple of years ago through a Freedom of Information request. So they've known for the 70s, they've been telling us for the 70s the oil's running out, the oil's not running out. I've got a figure here from the oil industry itself. They reckon 24 billion barrels still in the North Sea. They put the figure, the value of that at 15 trillion pounds. Still in the North Sea. I'll tell you something, I had a brother who worked for Shell for a number of years. He told me in the 1980s, there's oil in the north coast of Scotland and in the west of Scotland as well, but they'll bleed the North Sea dry first. So you've got 42 billion barrels there before we start moving round. Oil's a volatile commodity, they tell us, but it's alright for Britain to base its economy on the oil. But in Scotland, that'd be disastrous. We'd be the 6th richest nation on the face of the earth. We could redistribute that wealth to build a better, fairer country, to build a better life for all the people of Scotland. That's what independence is about, and that's what socialism is about. We also have food and drink exports of £5.4 billion every year. And one figure they analysed, apparently, on day one of independence, without anything else, every man, woman and child in Scotland would be roughly £510 better off. Without anything else. Just by the fact that Scotland became an independent country and they looked outward to the world and said, we're here, let's come and deal with it. Let's do what normal nations do. £510 every man, woman and child in Scotland. So even if you're just being selfish, you'd be better off in an independent socialist Scotland. But that's not what it's about. It's about building a new country, building a different country, building a better country, a country where the young don't look to the future and see unemployment, a country where children don't go to bed hungry, a country where billionaires don't salt away their cash and get ever richer to the extent they can never spend the money they've got while kids are starving. That's what an independent Scotland gives us the power to do. That's what socialism gives us the power to do. And I would ask you, when you go to the ballot box in autumn 2014, to bear in mind that it's your country. You have the power to change your country. We can only do that with independence, and I would urge you to support the creation of an independent Scottish Socialist Republic. Thank you.
Again, I'd like to thank Campbell Martin very much on your behalf for those remarks, and I wonder if everybody got one of these leaflets in advertising the meeting. You'll notice that we wrote across the front of it things that you might be reminded that an independent Scotland wouldn't have. An independent Scotland would never have another Tory government. An independent Scotland would never see its money siphoned off and sent to the UK Treasury. An independent Scotland wouldn't enjoy, in inverted commas, Europe's worst trade union laws. And I think Campbell has more than amply demonstrated what independence will mean. And of course it's very, very important. Here we are in 2012, 2 years to go. The polls say that 30% of the population are in favour of independence, 30% of the population are apparently dyed in the wool against it, and 40% in the middle haven't made up their mind. So our job over the next 2 years is to persuade that 40% in the middle that they will be better off, and that's why you should support independence. And meetings like this, the discussions that you have in your workplaces and colleges, families and communities, etc., are so important, because that is a debate that's got to be had. The 40% have got to be engaged in the discussion to see how they're going to vote, which side they'll come. And of course, and this, I say this in introducing John McAllion, who's our last speaker, very, very important role to be played in the next 2 years is by Labour supporters who support independence. Labour voters who support independence. People John McAllion represented and spoke eloquently on behalf of for many years. He's now a Scottish Socialist Party member, having been a Labour MP and a Labour MSP for the city of Dundee. And therefore I hope you give a nice warm welcome to John, who will explain why the case for independence is so strong, can persuade Labour supporters to support independence, and how we do that over the next 2 years. John McAllion.
Thanks very much, Colin. It's always a privilege to follow two speakers who are as effective as Sandra and Campbell have been. The problem is that haven't left me with very much to say till meeting this big. And I agreed with everything they said, and particularly what Campbell said about Alistair Darling and the doomsayers who tell us that Scotland isn't big enough or good enough to be an independent country. But we've got to be careful about this. The No campaign are a bit more subtle than that. If you go onto the No campaign's website, you'll search in vain for the word no. I mean, the website is awash with positivity, with phrases that we're all now beginning to become accustomed to hearing across this country. You know the ones, better together, that if we are both Scottish and British, we'll get the best of both worlds, that we'll be stronger, that we'll be more secure, that we'll be more stable, we'll be more successful if we remain a part of that family of nations that come together to make up the wonderful United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The website is full of that kind of thing. They even have a video which is politician free. They're not daft, they know that the public don't like politicians, so they don't even let the politicians on their videos. Their video is mainly middle class successful types, but it's very carefully produced. It has gender balance, it has age balance, it has a voice for the ethnic minorities, it even allows a voice for genuine working class people. People who go on and say, we love Scotland, we love everything about Scotland. We think Scotland's a great place to live, and we're as patriotic as that lot over there in the Yes campaign. It's just that we want to be British and Scottish at the same time. And that can be quite an appealing message for a lot of people who are not political and who are in that middle 30% who haven't made their mind up yet. And I think that over the next 2 years, we're going to meet that same theme again and again. People saying, change is too risky, play safe, you can have the best of both worlds, be Scottish and British at the same time. And wherever it's possible, Britain and Britishness and being better together will be marketed ruthlessly by the No campaign in an attempt to win the hearts and minds and above all the votes of that middle 30% who haven't yet made their mind up in referendum. You only have to look at what happened this week with the end of the Paralympics and the Olympic Games. how that was exploited by a triumphal procession right through the centre of London with 21 floats pulling 750 British athletes through throngs of masses of crowds waving Union Jacks with the Royal Air Force flying past, painting the sky red, white and blue, all ended up in front of a British royal palace where a British royal princess comes out and addresses the crowds, and where the Tory London Mayor, Boris Johnson, comes out and waxes lyrical about how the Games have brought the nations of Britain closer than they've ever been before in the past 300 years. The same Boris Johnson who earlier, when remarking upon British success at the Games, he actually said, Scotland will never vote for independence now. The Games are done for salmon. Vote Hoy, Chris Hoy, the gold medal winning Scot who says he's proud to be British and Scottish at the same time. And you know, some people write off, but in fact when I was watching it, I thought, Boris Johnson's a great lover of Latin and of ancient Rome. And I wondered why he hadn't arranged for the defeated athletes of other countries to be dragged behind the actual floats and chains to show Britain's superiority over the rest of the world. But at the same time, I mean, people say Johnson's a buffoon, but he's an increasingly popular buffoon. And we have to be beware of him. Behind the buffoonery, there is a very smart political mind. In his mind, in Cameron's mind, in the mind of the new Labour leadership, in the Liberal Democrat leadership, and the British Broadcasting Corporation, and all the best marketing minds in Britain will be working as one over the next 2 years to convince the people in the middle that they can have it both ways, that they can remain as proud Scots as anyone else at the same time as staying inside Britain. And if you actually go to any of the meetings like this, which are not just everybody in the same camp speaking from the same top table, if you go with us, you know, representatives of the yes camp and the no camp, and you listen to the unionist speakers, they always begin by saying, we accept that Scotland can survive as an independent country, because they don't want to be painted in any sense of being anti-Scottish. But they then go on to develop their argument by saying, but you can have it both ways. You can have the best of both worlds. The better option, the better choice is to stay where we are now. That's the safest, the most secure choice to make. And I think if our side are going to prevail over the next 2 years, we've got to take that argument head on. And we've got to challenge them, not only challenge them, but debunk the idea that you're better off together. Because being part of Britain has brought Scotland into a double-dip recession. It's left us, as Campbell said, with more than 220,000 unemployed people in this country. 44,000 of young Scots aged between 18 and 24 are on job seekers allowance. 15% of them have been on the scrap heap for more than a year. None of that appears on the Better Together website. No mention of that is made whatsoever at all, because the truth is that the record of the British state in terms of the economy is a disgrace. It's a waste of talent, a waste of ability, a waste of lives, and it's brought with it dire social consequences for the people of Scotland. Because on the back of all that unemployment and that economic failure, according to NHS Scotland, there's nearly 6,000 of our fellow Scots who are now actually diagnosed as problem drug misusers. The real figure is probably much higher than that. In 2010, the last year for which we've got figures, nearly 500 drug-related deaths in Scotland. Double the rate it was a decade ago. Alcohol abuse is even worse. Over 1,300 deaths as a result of alcohol misuse in the last year. NHS Scotland calculate that between them, alcohol misuse and drug abuse in Scotland is costing the Scottish economy £7,000 million every single year. And you know, none of this, as I said, gets mentioned on the Better Together website. In fact, I was recently invited by my union, the GMB, to come along to one of their political meetings in Glasgow and to make the case for independence against John Foster of the Communist Party of Britain, who for some reason the unions seem to think is the man to get across supporting the monarchy in Britain and so on. And I went through thinking it was just another union meeting, but it was a setup. As soon as I walked into the room, it was a bigger crowd than this here. There was over 100 people in the room, and I was the only one in favour of independence. All the sponsored MPs, the sponsored MSPs, the GMB loyalists were there, and they dug into me, the traitor, the man who used to be on our side but had gone across to the other side now and had to get a real kicking. And in the course of that meeting, of course, having made the points which I've made just now, and other points as well, like the fact that life expectancy in Scotland is amongst the worst in the European Union. I think it's only Hungary, Bulgaria and Slovakia they've got worse rates than we have inside the European Union. Like the fact that the Scottish Government classifies nearly 1 million households in this country as low income. Like the fact that there's more than 50,000 workers who earning less than the living wage, effectively earning poverty wage. Like the fact that 1 in 4 of our youngsters are still in poverty, 25% of our pensioners are still in poverty, a third of all Scottish households fuel poor, 65% of pensioner households fuel poor. And when I went through all this at the GMB meeting, at the end of it, they didn't believe me. They said, you're lying, you're making it up. As one of them put, I think the actual phrase he used was, they're mere assertions with no basis in fact. In fact, everything that I said at that meeting was taken from government websites, was taken from the websites of pensioner campaigning organisation, was taken from the front page of the Daily Record. And the Daily Record, but the GMB loyalists would not have it. They didn't want to listen because it didn't suit their mindset, and it didn't suit the mystical belief they have in the fact that we will be better off together in Britain. And as Campbell has said, it's set to get very much worse. The austerity programme, which has been brought in by the coalition government, and which will hack more than £100,000 million off our government spending programmes in this country, hasn't yet begun to kick in really. It will kick in between now and the next election, the next UK election. And things, it's not so much that things can only get better, things can only get worse and will get worse between now and that election. That is a reality. Just to give you a couple of examples of that, McAllion Council in Dundee actually carried out an analysis of what the likely impact of the new Welfare Reform Act will be on poor people across Scotland. And they calculate that every year £600 million will be taken out of the pockets of the poorest and the most vulnerable people across Scotland. That's what's going to be happening in the years between now and the referendum. Take again the SNP Scottish Government's programme, which is called, goes under the banner of reshaping health and social care for older people. This has been trumpeted as a great success and a great step forward for looking after older people in Scotland. The reality behind it is that funding for social workers, for physiotherapists, for occupational therapists, for home care officers, for nurses have been slashed. Wards across the country have been closed down that used to look after older people, and older people who are now in the Scottish elderly population, which is ageing rapidly, which is frailer than it's ever been, which is more complicated and demanding health and social care needs than it's ever had before, are being told that you have to stay in your own home, and instead of being looked after by professionals as you used to be in the past, an army of unpaid volunteers are currently being recruited under the Change Fund to look after you in your house or not look after you in your house. And the scandals that are happening every week in England at the moment will be happening in Scotland between now and the next election, and between the next UK referendum as well. And all the other things, public sector pay and pensions already under severe attack, not just from the coalition government, but from the Labour opposition as well, as we've seen from the kind of reception that Balls got at the TUC yesterday. We already have one of the worst state pensions in the whole of the European Union. The older people have seen their winter fuel allowance cut. If you're over 85, it's been cut even more than for other older people. We're now being told that the concessionary free travel for elderly can no longer be afforded, that we'll have to bring back the means test, and so on. And so the whole idea that we can allow them to get away with a campaign that says we're better off together, when all of this is going on under the British control and British authority, is a nonsense. Being together with the rest of Britain at the moment means that we will be worse off, not better off in the future. And nor can we expect any hope that the Labour opposition will get into power at the next general election and come to our rescue with massive spending programmes and redistribution of wealth in favour of the poor, because Messrs Miliband and Balls have already made it very well known that they will, whatever spending plans they inherit from the coalition government, they will respect and keep those spending plans. So any cuts that have not been made by 2015 will be implemented by a Labour government. Any cuts that are announced between now and 2015 will be implemented by a Labour government. And the misery for the workers and the poor will go on. Of course, the unionist response to all of this will be that, bad as these things are, and they will argue it's a result of a global recession, not their fault. They will say that it would be much worse if Scotland was independent, because as Campbell says, they've been arguing for years that we're too small a country to actually survive in the big, brave, the big, dangerous world out there. In fact, one of the unionists left, used to be an old cop, yeah, he was a nice guy, Vince Mills, from the Campaign for Socialism inside the Labour Party. His way of arguing it is that Scotland would be much better as part of a global player like Britain, because the global player can use its influence inside the European Union to drive Europe in a socialist direction in the future, just like they've been doing for the past 40 years. It's never been noticed Europe being driven in a socialist direction over the last 40 years. And you know, the idea that after the credit crunches, that small countries can't be successful in the modern world is absolutely nonsense. The credit crunch started in 2008, and the most recent report from the United Nations Human Development Index, which ranks countries by things like your literacy, your educational standards, your income for workers, your life expectancy and so on. It's the best countries in the world to live in. 4 of the top 10 countries are small countries with populations less than Scotland. Norway is number 1, New Zealand is number 5, Ireland is number 7, Liechtenstein with a population of 250,000 is the 8th best country in the world to live in, according to the United Nations Development Index. Meanwhile, Britain is back in 28th place, just 1 place above Greece in that index. So being small is no barrier to being a successful, modern, efficient, more equal country in the modern world. And remember, if Scotland comes out of Britain, that brings with it all kinds of advantages, political, social and economic. It means that we no longer have to be obsessed with retaining our permanent seat in the Security Council. It means that the price of that permanent seat in the Security Council means that we no longer have to keep the weapons of mass destruction on the Clyde. It means that we no longer need, as Britain thinks it needs to do, to be the 3rd top military spender in the world after the United States of America and China. It means that if we come out of Britain, we come out of a warfare state. Because remember, if you look back at the history of Britain since 1945, this is one of the few countries to be involved in no fewer than 22 separate wars and conflicts in that period. Come out of Britain, and we won't be sending Scottish boys to die in foreign lands to oppress people who never want to see us there in the first place anyway. Come out of Britain, and you leave a world, you leave a country that leads the world in privatisation and deregulation Come out of Britain, and Scotland could actually abolish the Tory anti-trade union laws. It would be within our power to do that, and I would hope that we would do it. Come out of Britain, and we wouldn't have to spend in excess of £1 trillion in bailing out the banks and the City of London, the private equity companies and so on. Because remember, it wasn't the retail banks that were bailed out. The banks looked after our wages and our savings. The banks that were bailed out were the investment banks and all these companies, which by searching for more and more profit brought the global economy to its knees. And a separate Scotland could be a very different Scotland, as Campbell pointed out. I remember Donald Dewar said, when devolution first came in, he said to me, you know, John, you know the great thing about devolution? It's a white sheet of paper. You start from scratch. You can write onto it anything you want. That's what you thought. It didn't work out like that. But independence doesn't allow you that. It allows you a new start. It allows the people of Scotland to decide what kind of country they could be in the future. And if they do that, I think we can build a very different country altogether. And you know, I'll finish by making these few final points, especially to those who argue that by pursuing an independent Scotland, we're turning our back on the workers in the other countries of the United Kingdom. The organised labour movement in Britain, and indeed the British Labour Party, has been on the parliamentary road to socialism for nigh on 100 years. And after that near century of struggle, we find ourselves further away from using the British state for socialist purposes than we were at the beginning. If you remember, Clause 4 came in 1918. By 1995, it had gone. The hereditary monarchy was there in 1603 at the Union of the Crowns. It was there in 1707 at the Union of the Parliaments. It's still here in 2012, safely here, securely on the throne, and making subjects, not citizens, of all of us who sit in this place. We still have an unelected House of Lords, which provides sinecures for government-placed people. We still have the House of Commons elected by an electoral system which guarantees that power can only shift between two parties, and that both of these parties are committed to the British establishment and the British constitution, and that anybody's against it, anybody that threatens change is crushed and thrown out the door entirely. You know, in socialist terms, we may be on the British parliamentary road to somewhere, but it's, for us, it's a road to nowhere whatsoever. Because I think, and this is the final point to me, the economic and social circumstances that brought the trade union movement in this country into existence no longer exist. I mean, we live in a different world today. The terms of the struggle between labour and capital in Britain have changed and changed irrevocably. Because there is no such thing as British capital. Capital recognises no country. The capitalist has no country. Capital roams the world looking for profitable opportunities. And it is, whatever country it's in, it takes on the mantle of that country. But in reality, it is nothing but contempt for that country. And if there's going to be a socialist revolution, if we're going to have a socialist society anywhere in the world, it's not going to come about as a result of a single national revolution in one country. Capital is too big for that to happen any longer. What we'll have to see in the future is labour going international as well. As the trade union movements in different countries coming together to act in unity. That can't be done under Britain. When is the TUC taking any solidarity action with the workers of Greece? When has anybody even suggested that the trade unions in this country take solidarity action with the workers in Greece? Of course they don't. But if the British trade union labour movement was broken up into its components parts of a Scottish labour movement, an English labour movement, a Welsh labour movement, and, well, I would say an Irish, not a Northern Irish labour movement, then they, because they've been so close together for so long, could start to create new ways of working together across national boundaries, which could provide a template for trade union movements across the whole of the European Union to begin to take common action and to begin to force changes in global capitalism, which are beyond the powers of any single country to do in its own right. I think that's the way forward for the people of Scotland. And I very much agree with what both speakers said earlier on. The SNP have got an opportunity to lead a campaign that will end up with the most decisive vote or decision that the people of this country have taken in its existence. And they're on the point of throwing it all away, because they're advocating them to vote for something that will change nothing. That the Queen remains, that Britain remains, that the armed forces remain, that the currency remains, that the control remains, that nothing really changes except that they get to make a few more decisions inside the Scottish Government. That's not good enough. If you're going to, people will take a risk if they believe in the future. And the kind of future which the SNP and the other parties are offering is not a realistic option for ordinary people to vote. It's not going to change it for the men in the street. It will make Alex Salmond First Minister of a more powerful government, but it won't make any difference to people around this country. For that to happen, Scotland has got to become really independent. And if that's going to happen, it can only happen if Scotland is determined to build a different kind of Scotland, an alternative vision of a modern country from the one that we've inherited under Britain. So thanks very much.